You might get a message. So I want to welcome you. I'm Joan Wolfe, cantorial soloist here at Hevrat Shalom, and I want to welcome you to the very first ever world premiere of the Talk to Me speaker series. Very first one. Tonight we will learn. Oh, look, somebody's applauding. I love that. Tonight we'll learn about the origin of words. Next month, we will hear from a person who participated in the Iditarod dog sled race. So every speaker will be diverse, and you will get an intellectual injection from the Talk to Me series as we go along. If you have any speakers you'd like to hear, please see me, and I'm never afraid to reach out and make a cold call to somebody that you've really been dying to hear. So it is my honor this evening to introduce an award-winning author of 28 cookbooks, Sheila Kaufman. She has taught, she's lectured from Alaska to Mexico. She's been around the world doing this for over 4 decades. She's demystified cooking, she mentors, she collaborates, she published many things, she's edited. She's working on refreshing one of her books on bread that she wrote, maybe, when was it? A few decades ago, I think. And now the book, which was on bread, will also include recipes for stale bread, which is sort of in a response to her concerns about food waste. She told me earlier that people waste up to 12 million pounds of food an hour worldwide. So she's speaking to that as well. And she's also fascinated by words. So she is like a Renaissance woman. When we can meet in person, I will definitely have her back for one of her amazing lectures on Jews and chocolate, and we will do chocolate tasting. I'm just teasing you right now because that's not happening right now, but we will do it. I promise you that will be part of our Talk to Me series at some point. So Sheila was one of those that wondered about how certain phrases were coined, what was the origin of certain words, and she did a lot of research and has learned that the English language is filled with many idioms and sayings and bits of slang that are derived from historical events and legends. Even some nursery rhymes that we learned, that we've taught our kids and grandkids, are really political commentaries, and some of them could have gotten the person who uttered them executed. Please join me in welcoming Sheila Kaufman.
Thank you, Joan, and thank everybody who's tuned in. I really appreciate it. I used to be a school teacher, so I talk fast. So if you need me to slow down, Joan, you just tell me. I lived off of Seven Locks Road for almost 30 years. And when I was sitting at a traffic light one day, I thought, why is this street called Seven Locks? It's kind of an odd name. And then I realized later, except that along our portion of the C&O Canal, there's 7 locks. Did you ever wonder who coined a certain phrase? What is the origin of some of the words we often use but seldom think about, and how they became part of our vocabulary? I have always been fascinated with history, and that led to finding out the origins of words and rhymes. Although you might not know it, you probably quote history on a daily basis. The English language is filled with idioms, and the English, the sayings and bits of slangs that are derived from historical events and legends. While the connections are sometimes obvious, other phrases have become so commonplace that most speakers probably never stop to consider their source. For instance, Gesundheit or God bless you. I was raised to automatically say this whenever anybody sneezed, whether on a bus or in a bathroom, be it friend or stranger. I've been saying this all my life. I never questioned why. I just said it to anyone who sneezed. Now, no one says anything when someone coughs or blows their nose or burps. So why do sneezes get special treatment? What do these phrases actually mean anyway? During a rainstorm, why do you say it's raining cats and dogs? And do you wonder about the nursery rhymes that we learned as children and taught our kids and grandchildren are really about? They are political commentaries for the most part, ideas and words that could get the person who expressed them executed, like Joan said. And so we're going to look at some commonly used words, phrases, and nursery rhymes tonight. Okay, next. Okay, next. Next one, Jim. We're going to start with God bless you or
Wait
gesund.
one sec. I'm working on it. Something's not right on there. Stand by. We'll
Yep.
get it. These are always the problems with Zoom.
I'm technically challenged, so I can't do anything.
All right. Ta-da. Go.
Many people have become accustomed saying bless you or gesundheit when someone sneezes. Wishing someone well after they sneeze probably originated thousands of years ago. The Romans would say juniper preserve us, or salva, which means good health to you. And the Greeks would wish each other long life. The phrase God bless you is attributed to Pope Gregory the Great, who uttered it in the 6th century during a bubonic or black plague epidemic. When anyone sneezed, since sneezing was an obvious symptom of one form of the plague, and he knew they were going to die. So he was blessing them before they died. And that's why we say Gesundheit or God bless you. We've been doing it for 1,200 years or more. All right, next one. This is one of my favorite words, Normandy. Now, we all know about the Normandy from the Second World War. And Normandy was, the French name was Normandy. And after the Vikings invented ocean-going ships, they began raiding England in the 700s. And later, they learned to sail up the Seine to attack Paris. Well, they attacked Paris for 100 years. And this led to Charles III of France in 845 decided that if you fight fire with fire, you can fight a Viking with a Viking. So in 1112 AD, Charles III of France met with Rollo, and who was a Viking. If any of you ever saw the Viking series that was on television, Rollo was the brother of one of the Viking kings. And he promised a huge piece of land to the Normans of the Seine, namely Rollo and his associates, for the protection of his kingdom. Now, this piece of land was Normandy, or land of the Norsemen, or land of the Vikings. Now, the grant also included a number of other stipulations. If Rollo agreed to be baptized in the Catholic Church, he would get formal recognition of the lands he possessed. He would be given money, and he would, most importantly, defend the realm. And the King of France would give him his daughter, Gisela, in marriage. Well, Rollo was no dummy, so he converted to Catholicism. And Normandy was the piece of land that Charles gave to Rollo. that huge piece of land that we know as Normandy. Now, Rollo took the baptismal name of Robert, and the seal of agreement was signed and sealed, and he married Gisela. And the thing I found so funny was that Rollo is the great grandfather of, are you ready for this? Those of you who love history, William the Conqueror, who became King of England in 1066 when he defeated the English people. And he became William the First of England. And through William, he is one of the ancestors of the present day British royal family, as well as an ancestor of all current monarchs in Europe and a great many claimants to the abolished European thrones. So I think Rollo was a fascinating figure. Now, my mother was from Fargo, North Dakota, and in cleaning, I came across one of these folded postcard things that you know had about 15 postcards on them. And there in downtown Fargo was a statue of Rollo. And I couldn't believe that Rollo was in Fargo, North Dakota, until I realized who settled North Dakota and Minnesota were the Norwegians. And they just revered Rollo. So he's everywhere. If you ever go to Rouen, he's buried in the big cathedral there, and huge esophagus and statues of him are everywhere in France. Okay, next.
It's frozen. Stand by.
Well, I can start
Oh,
talking.
there we go.
Okay. Where did we get this expression? This comes from the presidential election of 1840. Now, the Democratic candidate was Martin Van Buren, and he was nicknamed the Wizard of Kinderhook after Old Kinderhook, the Hudson Valley village where he was born. In reference to his village, his nickname became one of the Democratic groups formed to support him in New York, called itself the Democratic OK Club. Other supporters of Van Buren picked up the term OK sort of as a slang, and Democratic rowdies used it in their war cry in an attempt to break up the meetings of the Whigs. The phrase caught on and soon established itself as synonymous with the feelings of the original club members that they thought their candidate was all right or okay. How many of you say that regularly? Okay, well, next.
Stand by. We're getting there.
It's okay. We call a gratuity a tip because years ago in the English inns and taverns, it was customary for the patrons to drop a coin for the benefit of the waiters in a box placed on the wall. Now, the box had a little sign that said, "To ensure promptness." Later, the initials of the phrase were put on the box as TIP. So now you know when you give a tip, it's to ensure promptness. Okay. And salary comes from ancient Romans. It means salt money. Now, Roman soldiers were once given an allowance of salt as their pay. Salt was very, very precious. And then an allowance of money for the purchase of salt. This was called salarium, from sal, meaning salt. So the word salary comes from salt. In the mid-18th century, Lord John Montagu, the fourth Earl of Sandwich, loved to play cards. so much so that he never wanted to take time out to eat. So he solved the problem by placing slices of beef between two pieces of bread and munching away while he played card games. Now, mad as a hatter or mad as a March hare meant demented, zany, or fey. This expression predates the Mad Hatter and Alice in Wonderland. It is thought to derive from the effect on felt workers from the mercury they used in making felt hats. Now, felt hats replaced silk top hats in Europe when it was found to be a lot less money and easier to get than silk. Now, after some years, many of the felt workers developed a tendency towards severe twitching, hence the expression mad as a hatter. A different explanation derives from the characteristic wildness of the hare during March, the mating and breeding season, as they run about wildly, apparently quite mad. This expression was used at the time of Chaucer. Raining cats and dogs. Much more probable source of raining cats and dogs is the fact that in the filthy streets of 17th and 18th century England, heavy rain would occasionally carry along the dead animals along with other debris. Now, the animals didn't fall from the sky, but the sight of dead cats and dogs floating in by storms could well have caused the colorful coining of this phrase. Now, Jonathan Swift described such an event in one of his satirical poems. It seems that in describing waterborne animal corpses, Swift was referring to an occurrence that his readers would have been well familiar with. Now, my mother always told me to sleep tight. I never thought about it. How many of you had mothers that said sleep tight? How do you sleep tight? Well, I told my kids to sleep tight too, since my mother told me. Now, it took me 40 years later when I read about beds in the earlier centuries, which consisted of a headboard and a footboard. I remember my mother's bed having a headboard and a footboard. Very few beds today have headboards and footboards unless you prefer one of those types of beds. But in earlier centuries, there was a headboard and a footboard, and in between would be pieces of rope or leather fastened to the headboard and the footbed, which would support the mattress. Now, if you were rich, the mattress was stuffed with goose or duck down. If you were poor, it was stuffed with straw, which was probably dirty. And when the mattress began to sag, the strips had to be tightened to let the sleeper sleep flat or comfortably and not sag in the middle. So the straw mattress were probably full of bugs, hence the rest of the saying, sleep tight and don't let the bed bugs bite. The word tight means soundly or properly. So sleep tight just means sleep soundly. And the word was probably chosen because of its rhyme with night. So people wished each other good night, sleep tight. This kind of sounds unlikely. It is the bed rather than the occupant that is tight. And no one, in my experience, ever wishes furniture a good night's sleep. Okay. After this, I want to tell some things that are fun, but do not have pictures. Now, the white elephants were once considered highly sacred creatures in Thailand, but they also wielded a subtle form of punishment. According to legend, If an underling or rival angered a Siamese king, the king might present the unfortunate man with the gift of a white elephant. While ostentatiously it was a reward, the creatures were tremendously expensive to feed and house, and caring for one of them often drove the recipient into financial ruin. So the term has come to refer to any burdensome possession, whether it be elephant or otherwise. Okay, now I don't have pictures for these, but on the wagon, how many of you have ever heard the saying on the wagon? Well, in the olden days, it meant in England, a person has stopped drinking alcohol. And it came from an English Thai-born tradition. Now, prisoners who were transported to the gallows on a wagon were allowed one last drink in a pub on the way to their execution. If offered a second drink by a pub sympathizer, the guard would say, "No, they're on the wagon." Okay, turn a blind eye. Well, let me go to Get My Goat. Get My Goat comes from horse racing. Horse owners will often put a goat in the stall with a nervous racehorse who becomes accustomed to it and finds it very comforting and becomes less nervous and is not so easily upset. If, however, the owner of a rival horse can steal or get the goat, then the horse is even more nervous than before and may lose the race. Now, if you know anything about the Naval Academy, I believe the goat is their mascot. And numerous times, the Air Force Academy stole the goat. And this led to, believe it or not, a formal agreement in 1992 banning the stealing of the school's animal mascots as a prank. Navy goats were also stolen in 1995, 2002, 2007, and January 2021. Okay, so turn a blind eye. This is one of my favorites. It's often referred to as a willful refusal to acknowledge a particular reality. And this dates back to a legendary chapter in the career of British naval hero, Admiral Horatio Nelson. Now, Horatio had lost an eye due to an accident. And so he only had one good eye. And believe it or not, I didn't know this, during 1801, some reason England was making war on Copenhagen. I have to research the rest of that. And Nelson's ships were pitted against a large Danish-Norwegian fleet. Now, his supervisor and superior officer was very conservative. So because they didn't have cell phones or anything else to communicate, they would put up flags that you had to read for their messages. So the superior officer flagged for as a signal for Lord Nelson to withdraw. So the one-eyed Nelson put the binoculars or telescope up to his blind eye, and he said, "I don't see any flags. I don't see any messages." So he went on to score a decisive victory, and the British beat the people from Copenhagen and Norway. So that's what turn a blind eye came from. And dressed to the nines means that you were rich enough to literally purchase the entire 9 yards it took to make a tailor-fit outfit, including a vest, the jacket, and the pants. Okay, we're going to go on to nursery rhymes now. Nursery rhymes seem very innocent, but what could poems mean for the nursery contained in violence or scandal? But the truth is more complex. There have been many attempts to censor the sadistic phases found in several popular nursery rhymes. For instance, she cut off their tails with a carving knife. And many groups have claimed that certain rhymes, replete with adult shenanigans, are entirely unfit for children. In fact, most nursery rhymes were never intended for children. That's why the adjective nursery was not used for centuries. In general, nursery rhymes deal with torture, deceit, greed, murder, execution, theft, conflict, riddles, scandal, treason, bribery, and death. Some rhymes were stanzas taken from the bawdy folk ballads. Others began as verses based on popular street games, proverbs, or prayers. Still others originated as tavern limericks, spoofs of religious practices, social satires, and lyrics of romantic songs. But rhymes in their bawdy version were often recited to children because children were treated as miniature adults. If you've ever seen paintings of children in the 17th, 18th centuries, they wore the same clothes as the adults did, all the hoops and crinolines and everything else, and they were treated like little adults. So they were just treated that way. So nursery rhymes contain overt hints of cruelty and adult themes like Ding Dong Bell, Pussy's in the Well, Who Put Her In, Little Johnny Flynn. And when down came a blackbird and nipped off her nose, suggesting that the composers of nursery rhymes weren't always at pains to protect their young audiences from frightening images. Before 1800, the only true rhymes composed especially for the nursery were the rhyming alphabet. You know, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. If you'll notice, or you've never noticed, that is the same thing as when we sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It's the same tune. And the rhyming alphabets, as I said, the infant amusements like verses that accompany a game, and the lullabies. Now, nursery rhymes can be divided into categories. Popular rhymes like Humpty Dumpty, Pop Goes the Weasel, and Ring Around the Rosie. People rhymes like Jack and Jill, Little Bo Peep, Mary Had a Little Lamb, and useful historic and weather lore rhymes like Red Sky at Night or Monday's Child, and counting rhymes and the epic tales like London Bridge. Now, in the early 1800s, many rhymes were kind of cleaned up or sanitized to satisfy the new Victorian morality, and they don't read the same way to get today. Although the concept of rhymes is ancient, only in the 1820s did the term nursery rhymes come into use. Previously, such verses were known as songs for deities, and in the 1700s, specifically as Tom Thumb songs or Mother Goose rhymes. The adjective nursery first appeared in 1824 in a British magazine entitled On Nursery Rhymes in General. and described or ascribed to a pseudo Mother Goose. In America in the next century, Mother Goose rhymes would win out as the generic name of all children's verse, regardless of authorship. But who was Mother Goose? According to an early New England legend, the original Mother Goose was a Boston widow, Elizabeth Goose, born in 1665. Upon marrying Isaac Goose at age 27, she immediately became the stepmother of 10 children and then had 6 of her own. The associations of Miss Goose with the name Mother Goose stems from the volume of rhymes published in 1719 by one of her son-in-law. The people involved were real, and as widespread as this legend was, no copy of the book has ever been found. Other evidence suggests that the original Mother Goose was actually a man. Charles Perrault, who in 1697 wrote a book containing popular stories that bore the subtitle Tales of Mother Goose. He also was the author of Cinderella and many of the other stories for children. He also wrote Sleeping Beauty, and he popularized the fictitious Mother of Goose rhymes, and that's how we came to know them. Now, in the category of lullabies, Hutchaby or Rockabye Baby is the best known in both American and England. It is the first poem created on American soil. It first appeared in 1765 in a book, Mother Goose Melodies. Now, the author may have been a young pilgrim who came on the Mayflower and was very impressed by the way Indian squaws hung birch bark cradles with their infants on tree branches. There was a footnote that the author intended to be more than a mere lullaby. He said, "This may serve as a warning to proud and ambitious who climb high and generally fall at last." Counting rhymes included, "This little piggy went to market, this little piggy stayed home," and it's usually counted on an infant or toddler's toes, with each one corresponding to a different toe, starting with the big toe and ending with the little toe. This is a counting rhyme. The full rhyme continued to appear with slight variations, and in many 18th century and early 19th century collections. Until the mid-20th century, the lines referred to little piggies. Games are another category. Now, how many of you remember playing Ring Around a Rosie and falling down, or sitting with your hands in someone else's hands and doing Row, Row, Row Your Boat, or Patty Cake, or London Bridge, or Seesaw Marjorie Daw? Another category is accumulated rhymes. Now, think of the song, "There was an old lady who swallowed a fly. I don't know why she swallowed a fly. Perhaps she'll die. There was an old lady who swallowed a bird. How absurd. She swallowed a bird to catch the fly." And it goes on and on and on and on. Now, this is similar to "This is the house that Jack built." But all of these came from Hadgad Yol in, I believe, the 16th century. They were to teach children to remember things in order. Remember, all of these nursery rhymes had lessons attached to them. Did I say the right song? The one about the kid, the only kid? Okay. All of those kinds of songs and rhymes that we have today originated with that one, the Jewish one. Riddles are another category. One of my favorite riddles was, and put on your thinking caps, unless you know the answer. As I was going to St. Ives, I met a man with 7 wives. Each wife had 7 sacks. Each sack had 7 cats. Each cat had 7 kits. Now you're probably up to 1,400 and something. Kits, cats, sacks, wives. How many were going to St. Ives? Joan? 1. As I was going to St. Ives. But it's fun to watch the faces of people trying to multiply all those 7s and finding out that they didn't listen properly. So all of this has to do with nursery rhymes, and 7 was a very important number in history. There were 7 deadly sins, 7 visible planets, 7 hills of Rome, 7 ages of man, 7 archangels, 7 circuits of the Kaaba, 7 days of the week, and the 7 pure notes in the diatonic scale. And the charm of riddles has always been in its ambiguity. And okay, we're up to Little Bo Peep. This was written in 1885 by a man named Walter Crane. And the melody associated with the rhyme was first recorded in 1870 by the composer and nursery rhyme collector, James William Eliot, in the National Nursery Rhymes and Songs. The praise, excuse me, the praise means to play Bo Peep. This was in use from the 14th century. And if you've been to Williamsburg or to Salem in New England, you probably sat in the pillars and put your arms and your feet and your head through the pillars and had people take pictures of you. Well, that was a punishment of being stood in a pillory. For example, in 1364, an alewife was convicted of giving short measure, for which the crime was she had to play Bo Peep through a pillory. Okay. Three Blind Mice was written in 1609, and this is a round. This was one of the first rounds where you sing a line and then someone else comes in and sings the same line, and then another person can join in. So the original words of Three Blind Mice are believed to be based on English history. The farmer's wife refers to the daughter of Henry VIII, Queen Mary I, who was a staunch Catholic, and her violent persecution of the Protestants led to the nickname Bloody Mary. And here she's referred to as a farmer's wife, and she cut off their tails with a carving knife. Had to do with when the queen convicted them, she did not have them dismembered and blinded as inferred in Three Blind Mice, but she did have them burnt at the stake. Okay, next. This is my favorite because in all of my nursery rhyme books, there are these beautiful pictures of girls with watering cans in the garden and beautiful flowers. But this is one of the worst nursery rhymes. this has to do with, again, Bloody Mary. And Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? Well, Queen Mary never had a living child, so her garden didn't grow at all. And silver bells and cockle shells were genital and finger instruments of torture. And pretty maids all in a row were guillotines. So next time you sing that to your grandchildren, you will know what it's all about. The next one is a true story about a man with a number of children, and this offsets the killing and the torture. And this is a very pleasant one with a wonderful lesson that shows how smart girls can be. Now, this was written in 1797, and the origin was based on a man who had 5 children. He had 2 boys and 3 girls, and they were constantly arguing. The girls wanted to play house, and the boys wanted to play soldiers. So if the girls saw the boys were coming and wanting to play soldiers, they would put the kettle on so they would all have tea, and the boys would run away because they didn't want to play tea party. So Suki, take it off again. Suki, take it off again. Suki, take it off again. They've all gone away, meaning the boys ran away because they did not want to play tea party. And I think it's a wonderful song. Old Mother Hubbard, again, has to do with King Henry and Cardinal Woolley, who served as his Lord Chancellor. And the king had a problem that after 16 years of marriage to Catherine of Aragon, he had no male heir to the throne. And before he had gotten married, a special papal bull was required because Catherine was the widow of his brother. And after he got tired of his wife, he sent Cardinal Woolley to get permission from the Pope for a divorce, which was, of course, impossible. And Cardinal Woolley failed, lost his power, was arrested, and died in prison. And Old Mother Hubbard is the cardinal. The king is the doggy. The bone is the divorce. And the cupboard refers to the Catholic Church. Okay, next. Some nursery rhyme lyrics were historical in nature, but there actually was a King Cole. And most people don't realize this. He lived in the 3rd century, and he was reported to have built the English town of Gloucester. And when the Tudor kings, starting with Henry VII, claimed to descend from King Cole, so they had an actual claim to the throne, he was a live person and a living monarch. Okay. Now, this one was very interesting. When Henry was king, he wanted the deeds to all the monasteries so he could give them to people who liked him or he liked. So one Catholic abbot put 7 deeds to 7 of the monasteries under his control into a pie. So inside the pie were the 7 documents for the monasteries. Well, little Jack Horner pulled out a deed to one of the monasteries and claimed that he had paid for that monastery. It was called the Manor of Mells for himself. And his descendants insisted he paid for the monastery, but the rhyme of Jack Horner seems to show that he stole it. Okay. And London bridges, the Vikings destroyed many of the London bridges that were built out of wood. One of the original London bridges is now at Lake Havasu in Arizona. But the kids used to play London bridges falling down. And when you got to the part about building it back up, it was made of various materials like wood and clay, and then brick and mortar, iron and steel, silver and gold. So that's where we play London Bridge, okay? And Jack and Jill has to do with Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI. And Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. Well, they were both beheaded. And so the rhyme was sanitized into up get Jack got and home did trot as fast as he could caper. He went to bed and bound his head with vinegar and brown paper. So it would read nicer instead of that they lost their heads. It was sanitized, okay? And Mary Had a Little Lamb is also a true story. A minister in visiting his, and this is also sung to the same tune as Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And a minister had come to a certain town to practice under an older minister. And one day he looked out the window and he saw a lamb following a little girl to school. And the next day he handed her this paper, which he had written this poem on. Okay. Baa Black Sheep had to do with the price of wool that the person who raised the sheep ended up with very little, one for the master, one for the dame, and that was for the king, and then for the church, and he ended up with very little, okay? Ring Around a Rosie, the way I learned it meant ring around a rosy was the rash that went on your body, and pocket full of posies was to mask the odor of the plague, and violent sneezing was associated with it. That's achoo, achoo. We all fall down, you fall down dead. So that's the way I was taught this poem. Okay. And Humpty Dumpty is a true story. It was used to describe someone who was obese in the 15th century, but Humpty Dumpty was a cannon. And when the royalists were fighting with the parliamentarians, Humpty Dumpty was on the walls in Gloucester, which, remember, King Cole was supposed to have founded. And they sent shot through the wall, and Humpty Dumpty fell down. And not all the king's horses or all the king's men could put Humpty Dumpty together again. So they lost the war. when they lost the cannon. Okay. And Seesaw, Marjorie Daw, Jack shall have a new master. He shall have but a penny a day because he can't work any faster. We used to play that holding somebody's hands or on the seesaw. But in the 17th century, builders would saw to this rhyme so they would have a constant pace to saw with. And it appeared first in 1765. But in Scotland, Marjorie Daw is a slut. So it refers to slut and had a sexual connotation in this rhyme. And the original one was Seesaw, Marjorie Daw sold her bed and lay on the straw. For wasn't she a dirty slut to sell her bed and lie in the dirt? And lastly, we have the house that Jack built. We talked about how children would learn these kinds of stories so they could accumulate. Okay, I have two more. There's another one after this. This one is kind of interesting because it has no connotation whatsoever except to make children laugh or imagine the things that are going on in this poem. It's almost like something that Walt Disney would do. If you think about all the things that Walt Disney did, it would be to have imagination in animated film to get greater effects. So that's what this one did. It has no meaning whatsoever. So thank you. I'm sorry I took so long, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And
Thank you so much, Sheila. Wow. We will never say some of those to our grandchildren.
know what they are.
Yikes. Do anyone have any questions? You're free to unmute if you'd like. Any questions for Sheila? Also, cooking questions. What's her favorite recipe? What's her favorite restaurant? She's answered those things for me. Any questions you might have?
Can I tell them that if they ever need a speaker, I have so many lectures
Yes.
on Jewish.
Yes, we know that yet. And Michael has a question. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Michael.
Where did the expression kick the bucket come from?
I have that in one of my 4 books, but if you send me your email and kick the bucket, I will look it up and send the answer back to you.
Yeah. Oh,
I have Michael's.
Okay, you'll send it to me?
Sure.
okay.
Claudia?
Yeah, when you were talking about the stockades and, they were associated with a nursery rhyme, and I can't remember which one it was, but I didn't get the connection between the two.
What was the word you said?
The stockades.
The, in Williamsburg, where you put
Oh, head in the pillory.
the pillory, yeah.
The pillory has 3 parts. You put your head and a piece of wood would come down and then be locked on your neck.
Right,
And your hands would go through and be locked, and your feet would go through. And that had to do with, I think it was Bo Peep. I can look real quick, but that's
okay.
the pillory meant. It was, to play Bo Peep was referred to the punishment of being stood in a pillory. And in 1364, an alewife was convicted of, giving short measure That was a real crime in England if you didn't give the amount of bread or ale that you were supposed to. You went to the pillory, and
Yes.
she had to play Bo Peep through a pillory. So little Bo Peep has lost her sheep and doesn't know where to find them. Leave them alone and they'll come home wagging their tails behind them. This was written in 1885, but the real meaning had to do with the pillory.
Okay.
Ed Stern, Ed has a question.
Okay.
You have to
Yes.
unmute. There we go.
Oh, 1 sec. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I seem to recall there was an origin of the expression "so long." I learned about it a long time ago, and my recollection is that it had something to do with the sailors off of the coast of Africa hearing people say "salam," but I don't know if that's right. Does that ring a bell with you? The origin of "so long"?
I will look it up for you.
Okay, thanks.
Any others? Questions? Well, I wanted to thank you again for attending today and thank Sheila for your
Excuse me,
time today.
John, Steve had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. Steve.
I'm just wondering, we always thought that Hillel invented the sandwich.
Lloyd Sandwich invented the sandwich because he wouldn't stop gambling long enough to eat. So he was an earl. So he was the Earl of Sandwich. And he came up with the idea of taking a slab of beef and putting it between two pieces of bread so he didn't have to get up and stop gambling.
I guess the question is who came first, the Earl of Sandwich or Hillel?
Rabbi, what do you think?
Hillel, long before. Remember, the Haggadah has been evolving for 2,000 years. So calling it a Hillel sandwich was a more modern invention than the Earl of
Right,
Sandwich.
it was probably called something, the Hillel.
Oh, it was called
Flatbread.
something else until Earl of Sandwich. Okay.
But did they have the Hillel sandwich at the time of Hillel or not?
Right, it was
Probably
probably
not.
called a sandwich much later in its day. Well, thank you again, Sheila. And I wanted to again remind you who's coming in just about a month. I think it's March 9th, in fact. His name is Pete Ripmaster, and he was the winner in 2018 of the Iditarod race. And he wrote a book called The Long Way Home, How I Won the 1,000-Mile Iditarod Foot Race with Persistence, Patience, and Passion. So he is a motivational speaker that speaks all over the country, and I think it's going to be, again, one of those fascinating intellectual injections like tonight, and you will be smarter for it. So thank you to everyone for coming, and we can end the recording here, and then we'll share it with anybody that may not have attended, and we'll see you next time.